Welcome to another episode of And Then We Win. Before I do all the formalities and everything I usually do for the show, got to give a shout out to LU. And the University men's basketball team is playing in the Division II Men's National Championship coming up this Sunday in Indianapolis. And so I really hope the Bearcats will bring home a championship. And maybe the next introduction will be a lot more crazier because I'll be excited that the school I graduated from, I received my undergrad BS in sociology, class in 2007, and helped me become the person who I am today. Good luck to all the Bearcats that will be going, well, it should be in Indianapolis by now. They left sometime this afternoon via bus. And so sending good vibes, good energy, prayers, all the things to Land University men's basketball team I'm representing. And so now that that's out the way, most important thing, I'm really excited for this next episode. I've counted down because I'm going to take a break. We're going to take a break from this show as we get ready to start doing all the things, preparing for the summer and some activities. But it's funny because I started the show thinking I wasn't going to get a lot of responses. So I was like, okay, I'll do 2 episodes a month. And then when I started recording back in January, I had an influx of people say, hey, I want to be on the show. And I was like, okay, great. And then I was like, man, if I do 2 episodes, I'm going to drag this thing out for like until next year sometime. And so I am thankful for everybody who's been a guest on the show. We're going to have 4 more episodes after this one, and then we will, take a break and come back, and hopefully even stronger, even better with more topics, some more one-on-one time with me and any type of guest that I have here, special guest as co-host. And so if you're interested in being part of the show and you be like, I do sports social work or something in the sports realm of mental health, feel free to reach out. You can contact me at info@justsinglevision.com. Yeah, that's right. Haven't emailed myself in a while. And so that's where that came from. But lo and behold, this episode is very special to me. As I was thinking about different topics a couple of months ago, I wanted to diversify what I was bringing to the table. So fortunately, I met Gavin. I have to keep telling myself not Gavin Newsom, but Gavin Jones from Princeton University. And it was great having him on the show because we wanted to talk about, some of the stereotypes or what are some misconceptions about a student athlete at an Ivy League school. And so, you would think that most Ivy League schools, they don't care about sports, or maybe they may not have as many mental health concerns. And so that hasn't always been the case. As we know that some of the stressors that even being in the Ivy League school and maintaining, the high grades and dealing with the curriculum that they're dealing with and the program of their choice that they're studying in, it's a lot. And so then to add the sports component to it, it can be very challenging. And so I reached out to Gavin. He was like, hey, sure, come on, let's make it happen. And I was happy to have him share some insight about what the student athlete at an Ivy League school could deal with. It's always funny because I don't know if you saw the post leading up to this show, but if you had, thank you for following me on social media. And then we win on Instagram. What was unique is that, a lot of times I sit back and think about the different degrees of separation with some of my guests. And some of them are pretty close and shockingly had no idea that we were that close. But I thought this episode was quite unique because our relationship was quite unique because my uncle actually retired from Princeton. He did over 40-something years of service on campus at Princeton University. And then literally, I think about 3 or 4 days after recording the episode, my best friend Tyrone Aiken, his son TJ, Tyrone Jr., had received an invite to attend the football camp at Princeton University. And so it was just a lot of Princeton going on. I would have worn my Princeton sweater during the interview, but somehow, some way, a hole got inside of it. So I don't know what happened. Nothing crazy happened, but so it was a whole lot of Princeton relationships going on here. So I hope you really enjoy the show, enjoy the things that we're talking about, and get inside information from a well-experienced colleague in this space. And he even gave me a couple of nuggets for some good books to read too. So I won't stop talking, almost 5 minutes, and so it's time for you to get to the show. And so thanks, check it out, and I hope you enjoy the show. All right, and welcome to another episode of Then We Win. I'm Dr. Justin Singleton, founder of Just Single Vision, and one of the hosts of the show, And Then We Win. And I am happy to have on the show today Gavin Jones, electrical social worker, and he actually works for Princeton University. He's athletic counselor there. I'm glad to have you on the show today, Gavin. You don't know how many times I accidentally typed in Gavin Newsom by accident, but it was just one of those things. Okay, gotta reprogram to Gavin Jones. Thank you for being here today. I greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so when I saw Gavin and the work that he did, I was just like, I have to get him on the show because the school that he works for, coincidentally, I shared with Gavin that my uncle actually worked at Princeton for 40 years at a conference there before he passed away. So he worked for many years, and just so happened we have a 1 degree separation by employment at the school. And so, but the most important thing is that when we talk about athletes and all the things that they're dealing with as a social worker, we know you and I, Kevin, know all the things that they're dealing with, but they're to the Ivy League school, it's got to be a totally different parameter when we talk about Ivy League students who are athletes too. And so I just wonder if you could hopefully share some of the things that, what are some of the misconceptions or assumptions that we deal with when we talk about these students who are student athletes at an Ivy League school?
For sure. Yeah, the Ivy League athletic experience, I think, is unique in a lot of ways and is not unique in a ton of ways as well, right? So I think a very popular misconception about what it means to be a student athlete at an Ivy League school is, it's like sort of dependent on the point of view of the person, right? So like outside of an Ivy League institution, I think the kind of misconception of student athletes in an Ivy League school is that they couldn't make it somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
Like Ivy League is D1, is competitive within its own environment, right? But it's not a Power 5 or Power 4, wherever we are now, right? Like it's not one of
Might be
those
Power 2 before you know it.
Seriously, you're not kidding. But yeah, it's not one of those bigger schools. We're right down Route 1 from Rutgers, right? Like it's not a Big Ten school or something like that. And I think there's this kind of misconception that these athletes, couldn't make it at a bigger school, and that's why they ended up where they are, right? And within an Ivy League setting, we're talking about institutions that primarily, I want to say primarily, I think it again kind of depends on the perspective, but these are institutions, obviously, they're kind of academic first, right? They're known for their academics, their research, all of the really wonderful stuff that they're putting out into the world, right? The misconception is that the athletics kind of take a back seat to that, right? So these athletes are dealing with within their own school, they're dealing with a lot of imposter syndrome of I would not be here except for my sport, right? Which, there is no athletic scholarship at an Ivy League school, right? So to a certain extent, these students very much are getting in because they deserve to be there, but that's not always how they feel when they kind of come into the environment, So it's this really strange kind of dynamic that happens where sometimes they don't feel totally accepted within the Ivy League environment, but then they don't feel totally accepted in your kind of D1 athletic environment outside of the Ivy League either.
Yeah. Man, you talk about that imposter syndrome because we deal with that in a lot of spaces, especially when it comes to social work. We're like, okay, I feel like I should be here, but I shouldn't. And so when you think about, imposter syndrome for the student athlete at an Ivy League school, how do you address that? Or how is there I know there's not a golden ticket or golden answer about helping them overcome, but what are some things that you address to make sure that, you're not an imposter? You belong here in this space because of that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with a lot of those reminders, right? Hey, we don't have athletic scholarships here, right? You got in here because you had the grades to say that you deserve to be here, right? Kind of trying to challenge some of those kind of thoughts or those narratives of I don't deserve this, I don't belong here, I shouldn't be here. We can get really kind of deep with it and be well, what does it actually mean to belong here? What are we trying to
Yeah.
belong to, you know? But even outside of all of that, I think just really kind of reinforcing like, hey, you worked really, really hard to get here. You worked as hard as every other student did to get here. Did your work
Mhm.
look potentially a little different? For sure, right? But that does not mean that you did not work hard, and it does not mean that you are not equipped with the skills to succeed here. You
Mhm.
know, I think in that real, like, one of the reasons why I appreciate social work so much is that, like, really kind of connecting someone to their strengths, right?
Yeah.
That side of that sort of strengths based approach, I think, can be really, really helpful in grounding some of those fears and those worries of the imposter syndrome, and like just
Mhm.
reconnecting to, like, you know, whether you feel like you deserve to be here or not, you're here. So what are we going to do? Right? Like, what are we going to do from here? You're here. So, like, how can we make the most of this opportunity? You know?
Mhm. I was just thinking I thought about this just now. I was just thinking like, okay, yeah, the athletes, they're here, they belong here, and they did have a scholarship, so clearly they meet the standards to getting into the school. And so what about those athletes that are there and like maybe school starts to take more precedent than the sport itself? And so have you had experiences or what is it like to make sure that we can keep that athlete present in the sport and stay in academics? Because, academics is first, but how do we keep them playing and keep them motivated to still play sports?
Yeah, I think that you're describing like a you're describing a struggle that I think, especially early on in the experience at an Ivy
Mm-hmm.
League, like I'm thinking freshman year, you know, coming in. So like, yes, they've done the work to deserve to be at the school, and
Mm-hmm.
also, like, coming into a lot of these are, like, kind of the first time they're encountering some of the classes with the volume and degree of work, and depending on the major, they maybe are, like, in classes with people who have seen a lot of material before that they have not seen, and I think that that can be pretty daunting, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, like, I think one of the things for the Ivy League is that they don't want to, like, make concessions, we'll say, for
Mm.
like, okay, we understand you are an athlete, but that does not mean that that you don't have to be in class, right? That does not
Yeah.
mean that, like, you know, obviously they have like travel and stuff that they have to navigate around, but a lot of the academic expectations are the exact same as they would be for every other student.
Mm-hmm.
Maintaining a certain GPA, depending on whatever the major is, all of that kind of stuff. So it's hard because, in the one sense, right, they're athletes, of course, they love their sport, they care about their sport, they want to do
Mm-hmm.
really well. And also there's this whole other life of being at an Ivy League institution that they have to start navigating and balancing. So a lot of it is like really trying to sit in, we need to make a system for you that's going to work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because whatever your system was in high school is probably not going to work here in college. I think that's like broadly true, right?
Yeah.
So really trying to, like, catch them early and make sure that, like, we're able to develop a sort of system of success for them, connecting to supports that are available, whether that is, you know, like the writing center or connecting with a tutor, going to office hours, that kind of stuff. Just like whatever we can do to try and, like, ease that transition as much as possible. You know, there are certainly going to be some people that are a little more focused on their sport, and that's totally fine. There are some people who, you know, they find a major or class that they really enjoy, and that's something they really want to pursue, and their sport is, you know, just something something else that's kind of extra that they do,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's really not like a one size fits all approach, and I think that's
Mm-hmm.
why it's like really important that we have in our sort of sports psych team that we have at Princeton. That's why I think it's important that we have like a really solid understanding of, like, this is not a one size fits all approach when we're working with these student athletes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some of them certainly do want to try and take their sport as far as they can possibly take it. Others are like, hey, you know, this is a thing that I love and enjoy and it's good for me right now, but I'm going to be realistic and say, like, there is maybe not a future beyond this for me, right? So
Mm-hmm.
enjoy it while I can, but I do want to be, like, making sure I'm getting that summer internship, or making sure that I'm getting, like, the experiences that I want that will allow me to, like, leverage this degree to the fullest possible extent, you know?
Well, and I think it's great that you all have a team. Most teams have a team where they can work with these athletes. And I think it's critical to have these people there because the experience and the challenges are going to be different. I like the fact that like your freshman year, you're coming in like, hey, it's not the same as it was in the past. It was in high school, obviously. Like you're smart, was going to take a different degree, no pun intended, in order to make it and survive in this space. And so, I mean, it sounds like you all start off with the freshman year was about supporting those athletes
Mhm.
on and helping them understand what the culture is like. What other, like, you feel like, a prominent services that y'all provide for these athletes to make sure that they are successful academically and mentally as well? Because we all know that the pressure that it comes with being a student in college. I mean, that's obvious. Then you're talking about being in an Ivy League institution where professors see it like, hey, this Ivy League, we got a brand to maintain. It reminded me of the situation, on a side note, it reminded me of the situation, I think it was a Duke football player. They won a big game and they literally was on the news station or they was like, hey, teacher, can I get an extension? And the professor was like, well, you knew about this assignment all along semesters. Whether you're going to win or you're going to lose, the due date's going to be the same, you know?
Sure.
So it reminded me of that, but also just think about, what other are you feel like are critical supports for these athletes that are often needed for them to be successful.
Yeah. I mean, I think it really like I can't overemphasize the importance, I think, of us just being present and being in their environments, right? Like, I
Mhm,
think there has obviously been like a tremendous push, at the collegiate level, at the professional level, at the youth level. There's a tremendous push of kind of normalizing mental health talk in sports.
mhm,
I can think of like several examples, like we have the Olympics going on right now, right? Like I can think of several examples, some storylines, some of the Olympic athletes coming out and talking about like mental health. And so all of that is like really wonderful. And there still exists some taboo, right? Especially every sport has a different culture kind of around it. And some are a little more reluctant or resistant to engage in any kind of like help seeking or support seeking
mhm,
while others might be a little more open, right? So I think when we're kind of in our team meetings and talking, like I think the thing that we always kind of come back to is just it is so important that we are present and we are accessible. And this means being in their spaces, but also being like familiar faces, right? Like,
mhm,
so we go out and we'll do like a every year in the fall when all the student athletes are like coming back to campus, right? They're meeting with their teams for the first time. We try and make it a priority every single year that we're like getting out and getting in front of those teams and really just kind of normalizing our presence. Like, hey,
mhm,
your strength coach is right there, your athletic trainer is right there. Like, we are your mental health support and we're right here. And we've kind of found over the years, as we've tried to integrate more and more with certain teams, that the more accessible we are and the more familiar we are, the more athletes are willing to come in and make that appointment, whereas they may not have been so willing to make that appointment before. If it's
mhm,
just like a face and a picture on the school website, that feels a little different than like, oh, this is Gavin and he was out at practice last week. Like, I know him, I've
mhm.
chatted with him, like, really kind of lowering the barrier to entry so that when they do come in for that conversation, it doesn't feel like this total sort of otherworldly experience, but it feels like a little bit more familiar. Yeah, I keep
Yeah.
using that word, you know?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm glad you mentioned that because you say that, we always talk about mental health. It's big, especially with the Olympics going on right now. Even with Gabby Douglas, oh gosh, Simone Biles, she talked about the Twitsies a little bit. And like nobody had to know what that was until she
Mhm,
mentioned it. And I didn't think about like, oh man, yeah, if she isn't locked in as a focus, then one little turn could end her life. It's
for
that
sure.
important. So it's out now. We talk about it. It's out. We know how important mental health is. And so you're all on the front lines of making sure that people are visible about it. And so what about when it comes down to like making sure people make time for mental health? Because,
Mm,
you think about a student athlete schedule, and I'm gonna share the experience I had with a little bit was that you think about I'm an athlete, I'm a student first, so I have all this work I have to do. Then I go out to practice. We got to find some time to sleep and eat, or for sure mental health. You talk about me taking 45 minutes to an hour out of a day that I don't have to take care of myself. How do you all, or how do you all make sure that, you tell people that you need to prioritize this and why it's important, even though it may take some time away from your everyday life?
For sure. Yeah, that education piece is really important there, right? Like,
Mhm,
so when we're out and we're doing those talks, kind of drawing the comparison of like, hey, like you're going to go in for treatment with your trainer, right? And we kind of objectively understand why that's an important thing to do.
mhm,
You're going to go into the weight room in the off season with your performance coach, and we objectively understand why that's an important thing to do, right? Like kind of drawing that comparison that like all of that work is helping you to build resilience, helping you kind of prevent injury, right? All the preventative measures that you're taking, it's really easy to understand from a physiological perspective of like why that's important for your sport, and then drawing that comparison over to the mental side, right? I
mhm,
always am kind of using the example of like changing your oil, like you change your oil regularly to prevent a problem. What you don't want to do, and when the problem is the hardest to fix, is when we haven't changed our oil at all, right? And now my car is on fire on the side of the road. And it's like, well, what do we do now? Like, please help me fix it. And it's like, I mean, I can try, but
yeah.
like
Your
had
engine's
we
gone.
had we been doing this all along, like we'd be in
Uh-huh,
a much different spot. So I like the education piece is really important. And that's why we do value so much going out and talking to the teams, because that is when we can kind of be there and uplift that message. And we rely a lot on the student athletes themselves too, right? Like, so the ones who we have at Princeton, we have like student athlete wellness leaders, right? So these
mhm,
are student athletes that have kind of signed up to be in this position of, promoting wellness and in various ways amongst the
mhm,
specific teams that they're on, right? And so relying on them too to uplift that message of like this, your mental health is just as important, right? Going
mhm,
out and kind of talking to them of like, hey, you're fueling your body, that's your nutrition aspect, you're building your muscle, you're working on your technical skills, like you are doing all of this stuff to try and be the best that you can possibly be at your sport. And everything that you're doing is driven by one engine, and that engine is your brain, right? So if we're
mhm,
doing all of this for our body, why would we not want to do this for our brain? And one last thing to kind of add on to that too, right? Like talking about, yeah, we are in the Ivy League, right? We are at a D1 level of sport, which means that you're now competing at a level where, everybody's been doing this for years, and everybody's in the
mhm,
gym, and everybody's lifting the weights, and everybody's got the coach that they're working with to improve their technical skill. Like, you're at a level of your sport now where it's not really the big things that are going to start to make the difference of like the jump between you and the other person competing for the spot, right? It's now the little stuff. It's the stuff that you do consistently for yourself, and any kind of advantage you can give yourself can only help you in your sport, and this would be
mhm.
one of those advantages.
I'm gonna make sure the teenagers I talk to, hear that clip because I always tell them the big difference is, where you are if it's from your mental capacity, honestly. Everybody's when you get to a certain level, everybody's almost lifting the same or just as strong. But it's about, okay, what about your mental aspect that really helps you unlock, or that you do unlock to help you get to that next level to, perform better? I mean, to me, it's a big deal. It's all encompassing. And so you mentioned some of the commonality, like, yes, it is a D1 school, and yes, it is I believe, but yet it's still D1. Like, we're all out here performing. And so when you think about, and I should ask this, like, have you ever worked with non D1 athletes? I mean, non Ivy League students before?
So I had like a really brief stint. I was very, very fortunate coming out of my MSW program
Mm-hmm.
that actually my advanced year clinical placement in my MSW program was at Princeton's Counseling and Psychological
Wow.
Services. So I was very, very lucky that the time just happened to be kind of right, that the time where I was graduating, taking the licensing exam, getting my license, that I was like fresh off my internship, and they
Mm-hmm.
just happened to have a spot open up for me, right? So very, very fortunate in that I was able to kind of carry that work over. I had a very brief period of time where I was also kind of working out in a private practice. So at that time, I did work with a couple of like high school age athletes, and then yeah, an athlete that was at a nearby university, I think would be like D2 or D3.
Okay. So, I mean, you have a few experiences. Are there any big differences when you're talking about your client base when you're mainly at Princeton now, but have had experiences before? Even talk to you probably have some colleagues that work at other non-Ivy League schools, and so when it comes to the athlete within themselves, what are some of the commonalities that you've seen between or heard between the two types of athletes?
Sure. I mean, in terms of like commonalities, I think that the dedication is key, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think somebody who's like really committed and dedicated to their sport, they're going to be that way, whether they're at a D1 school or it's like somebody in high school that is, just trying really hard to make it and do well. I think
Mm-hmm.
for athletes, sport provides it provides a lot of things. Usually it is like this satisfaction, right? Or like this idea that I'm doing something that is really hard. And regardless
Mm-hmm.
of the level of sport that you're at, there's always aspects where it's hard. And yet in it being hard, we still find our strengths, we find our ways that we can kind of overcome challenges and like just really kind of build that efficacy. So that's like the thing that I think is important to connect to, regardless of the sort of level
Mm-hmm.
that somebody's competing at, right? Obviously, there's a lot of differences too in speaking of like a D1 perspective, right? Like we're at a level where like the sport is really intense, right? Like the
Mm-hmm.
coaches are kind of demanding from that athlete just as much, if not more so, as like when they go to class and like the professors are, asking for work or assigning these tests, right? Like coaches are treating this like it is their job, and in some ways it kind of is their job, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that pressure, that demand is maybe a little less at other kind of lower levels of sport, whether that's collegiate sport or high school. I think
Mm-hmm.
I think in high school, I've heard this a lot from the athletes that I've worked with, right? Like high school at a certain point, somewhere around like junior year or so, if they're trying to get recruited to play their sport, right? Like the sport does kind of become a job a little bit, right? Like
Yeah,
it
yeah.
is important for them to do well because the better they do, the better opportunities they get, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it really, a lot of them will have this experience where it really kind of changes their relationship with their sport. Like this used to be something when I was a kid or when I was in middle school, early high school. I did this because I loved it, right? Like I did
Mm-hmm.
this because I fell in love with it. It brought me a lot of joy. It was a passion. And somewhere along the line, like the relationship changes a little bit and it becomes like at times more of an obligation or more of a pressure. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really important, like a conversation that I'm having a lot with these athletes when they get to the college level is sometimes we do need to re-examine this relationship and find a new purpose or find a new why. The reason why I'm doing
Mm-hmm.
this, because the reason why you're playing your sport when you're 20 years old in college is likely not the same reason you were playing your sport when you were 10 years old.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because on the previous episode that will be airing, we just talked about the purpose and understand like finding your purpose while you're in the sport too. I mean the connection for that. And so that purpose part is very critical for the athlete because like it does shift and change
Yeah.
due to the outcomes.
Yeah.
So we talked about like how critical it is for mental health services to not only just sell it to the athlete, but what about is like sell it to the coaches? Because I can only imagine that I don't know, like we talk a lot and like the taboos there it exists. We have this information, the athletes are speaking out about it, but sometimes coaches aren't too big on it. And so and we all know that in order to do this work, we have to sell it to the coaches too. And so, what is that experience like for you been with, talking about to these coaches the importance of this mental health for
Mhm.
these athletes and making sure that they find the space for those conversations and services.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, the coach is really key in a lot of ways. Some sort of like obvious and then others that are a little more underneath the surface, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking like in our system, right? So us like myself and the other sports tech providers that we have on our team, we exist as part of like services that are available to students, but
Mm-hmm.
we're not like directly embedded into the athletic department, right? And because of
Mm-hmm.
that, there is like a little bit of separation that when we're going out and we're talking to these teams, um, we do have to kind of like find an in or find an opening. And the
Mhm.
coaches can be like really, really crucial in that experience. We have a lot of really wonderful coaches at Princeton who, they're all about like what we do and they support what we do and they really recommend and encourage their athletes to come meet with us and come speak with us. Right. And like, I'm thinking like when I was talking about before, when we're going out at the beginning of the year to give these team talks, the sort
Mhm.
of the reception that we get from the coaches is really, really important, I think, in sort of modeling to their team, like how acceptable this behavior is.
Mhm.
I work as a sort of embedded clinician with our football team. And I'm really, really very lucky that like our head coach is just so supportive of the work that I'm doing. And,
Mhm.
he invites me out to the practices. He invites me to talk. He really models in front of the athletes like this is like a helpful and important thing, and then like our performance staff, the strength coaches, will like echo that message, right? And
Mhm.
that like kind of gives us an opening to that team, whereas it would be very different, if I'm like going out and giving a talk to a team and the coach is not present,
Mhm.
or the coach is present but they're not engaged, they're not paying attention, like that.
Mhm.
All of that kind of that nonverbal stuff really sends a message for like how acceptable this sort of behavior is, right? And sometimes it is like kind of a sell, like we have to kind of like market to the coaches like, yeah, this
Yeah,
is
yeah.
maybe not something like, I think generally for the most part a lot of them understand like mental health is important, and like
Mhm.
when my athlete is struggling, like this is the person that I want to go talk. Like I think they kind of understand that at a high level, right? But it is also like just the sort of presence piece that
Mhm.
that is important as well, just like allowing us to be in the environment. And again, that kind of like that sort of like nonverbal support of just like,
Mhm.
yes, like these are folks that are here, part of our support staff, in the same way that our athletic trainer is here. And
Mhm.
it's like it's helpful. I'm like kind of
Yeah.
struggling to sort of put a word on it, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah. I mean, your presence is there, and it's good that your coaches are allowing you to be in those spaces too, which is very important. 'Cause all that matters, like showing up and being in places where you're wanted, and then also letting athletes know that you are wanted here in our space too, because it's not just like we're doing it just to be like, oh, we just want to say, I don't know, whatever your reason may be totally different, but we let them know that we are here present for them and you're seeing us here for you, which is critical too. And the coach is backing you up. You got to love that as well, because sometimes that relationship can be hard to establish and hard to understand at times. And so I did my homework on you just a little bit. I know that you provide a lot of different modalities, I'm sorry, and have a lot of personal interest and focus in certain areas. We talk about, acceptance and commitment therapy, working with identity, leadership, and anxiety, which I know pretty can imagine is pretty high in those areas. What do you see that this may be a question for our clinician folks, what do you see you often providing support the most when it comes to dealing with athletes and their mental health? 'Cause I can imagine, we all hear the statistics about, on the side note, like, suicide rates being high at Ivy League schools. We talk about depression, anxiety, pretty being like we hear the numbers, but like, when we're working with the athletes too, what do you feel like some of the areas that you're often more addressing more than the other? Or it could be all balanced. I don't know.
yeah, I think it's certainly the anxiety piece. Yeah,
Mhm.
I think sort of there's a lot that can be going on for someone, right?
Mhm.
And when we're talking about an athlete specifically, whether it's because they are so pressed for time, they have a
Mhm.
lot to do, they view, talking to a mental health provider or a sports psych provider as something that maybe is like taxing, or there's like a vulnerability there and they're not quite
Mhm.
sure how they feel about that, right? Like they might wait. I think
Mhm.
a lot of the statistics show that the student athlete population is a little bit slippery when it comes to, coming in and speaking with someone about mental
Mhm.
health, right? And so I think where it will typically impact them the most that they will finally make the decision to come talk to someone is when it starts to impact their performance, right?
Mm.
So we see a lot of performance anxiety, right? Like that's usually a sort of broad umbrella there, right? But somebody's usually coming in because it's like I'm doing this in my sport and I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling nervous, I'm feeling kind of panicky, right? Or my body's kind of betraying me, or I'm very aware of like my coach looking at me and like I want to do this but I end up doing this, right? Like so
Mhm.
it'll be like a lot of that type of stuff. And then what we find when we kind of really get into it is there may be that, but there's maybe also like something else going on there too, right? Maybe
Mhm.
it's like, maybe there's, things going on at home that's on their mind, right? Maybe they
Mhm.
have generally had like some kind of lower mood or there is some depression going on there, right? So, I mean, I've seen a lot in I've been at Princeton for about 5 years now, I think I'm
Mhm.
in my 6th year. So seen a lot of different things. There's, people really struggling with like some grief and loss. There's some
Mhm.
like past traumatic experience that might be coming up, but sometimes it is just like something that we might consider perhaps a little more subclinical. So it's like
Mhm.
I'm worried what my coach is going to think of me, or I'm worried I'm going to let people down, or I feel like I don't belong here, right? Like that kind of imposter syndrome stuff kind of coming back up.
Mhm.
So it can take the path can diverge in many different directions, but usually the thing that's going to bring somebody in is like there's something going on and now it's impacting my performance in a way that is like undesirable. So we'll classify that as sort of a general
Mhm.
performance anxiety kind of thing.
And then you find out there's like 10 other things going on. Like, well, okay, we should have had this. You should have came right after the talk I had at the beginning of the school year.
Sure. And that is like that's usually quite often, right? Like I'm talking to I had a couple of initial consults with some people just this week
Mhm.
that, we're sitting here the end of February, spring semester, and they're saying like, oh, I should have come talk to you in the fall, or like, I wish I'd come talk to you during my freshman year or something like that,
Mhm.
right? And, maybe that's true. And also, like always kind of uplifting and emphasizing, well, you're here now. And that's the important part.
And let's get to work. Let's definitely do the
Yes.
work now. And so I was thinking, I've been talking a lot about the high impact on the athletes and building relationships with coaches and whatnot. And now I was just thinking about, well, what about Gavin? Like, how does Gavin take care of himself? Because with the amount of stress and pressure that comes along with your office, and I can imagine, like you just shared this recently, like somebody just came to you 2 or 3 years ago. Now they finally realize, like, well, now we got so much to unpack. It's like, man, I know it could take a toll on me, Gavin, as the athletic counselor. So, what do you do to take care of yourself in such a area where it's high stress and high demanding at times?
Sure. Yeah. Like it's always so fun. I think like we as sort of like as like therapists, clinicians,
Mm-hmm.
like it's always kind of the running joke that we're always going through the toolbox and giving the strategies to the people that
Mm-hmm.
we work with. And then it's like, well, what are you doing for yourself? And you're like, I know
Nothing.
I should be doing more, right? But no, I mean, I think like again, like I've been doing this job for a little bit now, and definitely at the start, I would have those days where I would come home and I just like, my brain was fried and I couldn't like form a sentence. I would have to like just go in my room and be nonverbal for a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
like just kind of really, it was hard to deal with. It was sort of
Yeah.
hard to manage at the start. And so in kind of having those experiences, like you really like it is really crucial to find the things that are helpful for you and find the things that work for you, right? So
Mm-hmm.
for me, that's like going just like hanging out with my dog and I get home from work and we're going to go out for a walk or something like that, right? I'm a nature guy, so like green things, green spaces, I'll go out into the garden or just go be outside for a little bit. I find that to be really relaxing and restorative for me. The interesting thing is that the work also can be restorative, but different parts of it, right? So
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that I'll tell anybody that I really, really love about my job is that I'm doing a lot of different kinds of things, right? So I have those days where I'm like back to back one-on-one appointments all day long, and that can certainly be like mentally, emotionally pretty draining and exhausting. And at
Mhm.
the end of that day, I might go out to football practice. And I love being at football practice, right? Like I'm not doing anything really, right? Like I'm standing on the sidelines, I'm chatting with the guys when there's a down moment, right? But like just being there and being in the environment of sport is something that feels really, really wonderful and like rejuvenating for me, right? So it might be a really long day, but those last 2 hours of my day, they just fill me with so much joy, right? To
Mhm.
be out in that environment that in and of itself is like really restorative.
That's great. And I asked that question so we could provide a reminder for ourselves and hopefully you too, because it is critical within this space. Like, so many people can imagine rely on you and what you provide for them. And so it's always important, like, okay, what can I provide for myself which is critical. That will help keep me going each and every day. And so thank you for sharing that tidbit as a reminder. And Gavin, you brought so much to the table here. I'm pretty sure I can ask 50 million more questions. But I do want to before we wrap up and end the show today, I always ask this question, and bring up to the light about the idea of winning. And we always talk about winning is essential, is a key to all the sport. Like, you want to get a sport and get involved and you want to see some of the glory behind of it. But we need to see some of the glory happening behind the scenes. And so when we talk about winning, what do you feel like is critical before we even talk about the concept of winning for the athlete, especially when we talk about the Ivy League athlete in your work?
Sure. Yeah. It's like one of the things when I'm meeting with athletes where we're always talking about like how are we measuring success, right? Like
Mm,
what does success look like to you? And generally the immediate answer is going to be something like outcome driven, right? So success is we win the game or we win the championship or get, this time or, like whatever the case may be. And this is sport, right? I'm not going to say that that's not important.
yeah,
Obviously, it
yeah.
does. It holds some importance, right? But it can't be the thing that carries you because you're not always going to win, And there may be times where you feel like you win, where you win, but you don't feel like you've won, right?
Mm,
And there are times where we can feel like we've won even when we don't win. So I think it's like really, really important and something that I'm always trying to connect athletes back to is right. Like we can measure success in the outcome, but that is ultimately not like a super sustainable way to engage with our sport. So if we're not measuring it based on outcome, what are we measuring it on, right? What does success actually look like here? And trying to find like non outcome driven, more process driven metrics of what success looks like. That is where we kind of find sustainability in sport because that is something I can repeat. For me to win a game, it depends on me, but it might depend on a lot more than what I can actively control, right?
mhm,
And so if I'm always focusing on how to win and that makes me also focus on the things I can't control, then I'm kind of already playing a sort of losing game there, right? If I'm focusing on the things that I can control, that gives me stability, that gives me consistency, that gives me a process driven sort of metric that I can come back to over and over and over again, regardless of the situation.
mhm,
So before I'm even willing to talk about like what is the goal in terms of the outcome, I'm always asking my athletes like how are we defining success in any way other than what the outcome is, right? Maybe the success is that I stuck to my like pre-performance routine. Maybe my success is that I feel really good about everything I could have done and I really feel like I left everything out there, But
mhm.
like finding those aspects of like what does success look like that actually has nothing to do with whether or not we win. And that's where we can find like a little bit more stability.
Wow, that's a healthy reminder right there. I'm gonna have to go back and write that in my notebook because I love just literally reading a book last week that was talking about defining your success, and so but the most important, like you mentioned, is like okay, how do we define that success? It shouldn't be outcome driven. It should just all be focused on winning because it can come success doesn't have to mean winning. And so that is a correlation that's often put together, but doesn't have to translate to be the same thing. And
Yeah.
so, I'm gonna go back and write that down in my notebook after I review and edit everything. But Gavin, thank you. I greatly appreciate it. I'm glad we was able to get this time pinned down and have this conversation. It's very critical for all of our athletes. And, whether you're Ivy League or not, even though this is the focus, but this is some very critical areas that needs to be addressed as you're taking on this life as a student athlete or maybe an athlete in other spaces too. So thank you so much. I'm glad we was able to make this happen. And I look forward to definitely have some more conversations with you in the future. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Justin.
All right. Thank you. And thank you for tuning in to And Then We Win. My name is Dr. Justin Singleton, and I'm a sports social worker. I love what I do. And if you're interested in learning how I can best support your athlete, your parent group, or even the team, please feel free to reach out to me at info@justsinglevision.com. That is info@justsinglevision. Feel free to contact me for a free 30-minute consultation so we can figure out how we can best support the mind, vision, and action of your athletes. Thank you and take care.